Another Way is Possible is a community-powered podcast from the Nina Collective, exploring what it means to co-create a racially equitable future rooted in belonging, justice, and co-liberation. Each episode invites listeners into the kind of dialogue that sparks change from the inside out. Welcome to the Nina Collective Choir Conversation. I'm Ananda. I'm one of the member directors of the Nina Collective. And today we're having a conversation called We Got This. Woo! Rebuilding through everyday practice. We are exploring what it means to rebuild, not through one grand solution or combination of technical things, but through this small, continuous practices that help us feel seen, safe, and connected again. Joining me is my colleague, Alia.
Hey everyone, I'm Alia. I'm another one of the member directors of the Nina Collective. Welcome in. When things have been fractured, when we're thinking about relationships, trust, community, institutions, all those things, it can be tempting to look for a blueprint, right? A perfect plan. I've been that person. Or a quick fix. But rebuilding often begins in the ordinary. How we listen, how we respond, how we repair, how we practice dignity and joy with one another. And I'm excited to do that today.
Thank
And
you,
Alia,
Alia.
that's a whole word. Thank you. Yes.
And today we're joined by a colleague, comrade, Cornelius Minor, an educational leader, a teacher, an author, a father, and a baker whose
Yes.
work helps people think deeply about learning, justice, and the everyday choices that shape whether people can belong and thrive. So, Cornelius, thank you so much for being here with us, for accepting this invitation. Thank you for all the work that you have done before I met you, and for all the work that you have done alongside this beautiful community that is unfolding. The question of the hour is, when we hear the phrase rebuilding through everyday practice, what comes up for you?
Wow. Wow. Well, so much comes up for me. Again, I am an educator and a parent, and a partner. But before I was all of those roles, I was a child. I was a son of my two parents. I have two very powerful parents. My father, who recently just became an ancestor. But one of the things that I think a lot about when I think about this idea of rebuilding is I think exactly about what Aaliyah was saying. I think about process. That there's so many times where folks are looking for, the answer. And I think about all of the ways that answers don't come in an instant. There's the proverb, how does the lion eat the antelope? Bite by bite, right? And so I think about what is the right next step that I can take and honor that step. And then I think about how do I take, the right next step, as I speak to you all even right now, it is spring. And for those of you who are on this call as educators, you know that March and April are really hard months in the life of a school ecosystem, in the lives of the children that we serve, and in our own professional lives. And so right now I am vacationing. And for what that means for me is, most people go to a fancy place, hang out in the spa. I just lay on the floor sometimes, and so, but that honors that sense of bit by bit. What does my body need right now? My body needs stillness. My body needs quiet. And so, as we think about how we apply this institutionally, really, it's finding those spaces within our institutions that are still. Finding those spaces within our institutions that are quiet. And often those spaces are people. Um, you know, Nana, you and I have been together through several turbulent professional moments. And sometimes when I can't find the space, I just go to you, because you are my space, or if I can't find the space, I go, sit with another colleague, And so I think when we talk about bit by bit, it's honoring um, not those grand solutions, those capital S proper noun solutions, but it's finding how is my co-teacher a solution in this moment? How is my student a solution in this moment? How might I find a community organization that might be a solution in this moment? And it's those moments strung together that form those big transformational changes that we're looking for.
Yeah, this is so counterintuitive, I think, to how our organizations react and respond. We often think about like rebuilding as if it starts with a strategic plan. But
Hmm.
what you're sharing with us today brings us back to what is happening between people every day. So,
Yes.
what do we miss when we think about rebuilding only as a large scale effort?
I think when we think about rebuilding only as a large scale effort, we miss the people, we miss the community. Rebuilding becomes this institutional thing. Um, but when we really look at change, both evolutionarily and historically, the only thing that has ever change people is other people. So it's how do I hold myself in close relationship with the students that I serve, with the teachers that I work with. This idea, my partner Cass uses this idea called community up. She often talks about community up leadership, right? Leadership that comes from us holding each other in community, holding each other accountable, everybody contributing. And that leads to the kinds of change that we're thinking about. That if someone comes with a top down solution, that solution is not of me, right? That solution is not of us, right? And that solution and those solutions often privilege um, outcomes that are good for institutions, outcomes that are often associated with capital or productivity. And we know that when we honor humans, productivity happens organically. When we honor humans, profit, however we might measure profit, be that the amount we learn or the amount that we make, profit happens organically. But when we honor institution first often crushes the humans within it, um, or crushes the spirits of the humans within it. Yeah.
Wow, this
Yeah.
is already we're 10 minutes in and this already feels so rich and so beautiful and so inspiring. I appreciate the honesty around being an educator and being on the floor, right? And I think that I feel I have been feeling it in that space like what is it like to
Mhm.
just like fall off and just let everything just to be outside of that space for a minute. So thank you for also humanizing your own experience and as you always do as we're navigating this the moment of destruction of so many things that we thought were steady. Um and the other piece that I want to bring is that you bring this human-centered approach to this conversation, right?
Mhm.
In a time where largely we are experiencing dehumanization, right? My
Mhm.
people are experiencing dehumanization as an immigrant, as a queer person. Educators are experiencing dehumanization. Young people are experiencing that. Um, folks everywhere, folks in nonprofits, right? So there are so many layers of you're not needed, you don't matter, you're not worth, you don't belong. You
Mhm.
know, people in Iran are hearing this loud and clear message,
Mhm.
and you are bringing us to center in this conversation around what does it look like to center humanity, even in the time where we are experiencing multiple layers of this dehumanization, right?
Yeah.
And so, when we are fully aligned
Yeah.
with that human centered, um, and really thinking about rebuilding that begins with another human. I appreciate you saying that I'm your
Mhm.
space too, right? So what
Mhm.
how are you navigating that, in general, and what is some of the messages that you can share with folks?
And to go back to Aaliyah's point from earlier, I think I'm navigating it all bit by bit, right? There's this belief where I'm from, where this belief in presence, that presence is really important. That I can only be where my feet are right now, and so even though this society may want me to be 2 weeks from now as I think about my lesson plans, or it wants me to be down the hall as I think about yet another meeting that I'm late for, right? There are all of these places where even our kind of energies are fractured because there's all these places we have to be. But I'm really practicing, being where my feet are right now. Even in European culture, Tolstoy has this kind of question that he asks, who is the most important person? And the most important person is the person that you're currently with. All right. And so this idea that when things are fractured and I don't have a blueprint or a grand scale plan, I think about who are the people that are in closest proximity to me and how can I ensure that their humanity is intact. For me, the answer to that question is often the 28 students who are in a classroom with me, right? And so I cannot exert any power or control over what's happening with the federal government. I cannot exert any power or control over what's happening in Gaza or in Iran or in, the Congo or in any number of places where there's conflict. But where do I have power? I have power among these 28 students that I'm with, and I can hold them in safety and in humanity. And then what they do from there is they take that little bit of safety that they learn from me, that they grow with me, and they can take that home to their apartments, to their grandmothers, to their aunties, and then that's how things like spread. I think I spend a lot of time, like many of you, worrying about the world, and I'm trying to invest more time in thinking about what are the things that I can actually touch. Again, I'm privileged to be in a position where, again, I cannot touch what's happening across the ocean, but I can touch what's happening across my classroom. And so I think I ask myself often, there are these two realms that I am in constant tension with, right? There's my realm of concern, right? All of the things in the world and in the universe that I'm concerned about. But then there's also my realm of influence. Those are the things that I have, some power to negotiate with. And so I've really been thinking about how do I water and invest in my realm of influence. And here's what we know about humans, especially humans who are invested in learning, that when I get really good at nurturing my realm of influence, which is a classroom of 28, what happens is that realm of influence grows. So today it's a classroom of 28. Tomorrow it might be a whole department of seventh graders, right? And then the year after that, maybe it's a whole school. And then the year after that, maybe it's a community. And as people who are interested in doing the work, I think that the work is investing in my realm of influence and then growing that realm over time. Yeah.
So good. I know we're a
Mhm.
little bit off where we wanted to be, Ananda, but I'm super curious because what I hear is happening right now is like we're moving from this idea of rebuilding into the actual, and you're offering some actual practices that make it
Absolutely.
possible. I'm really
Mhm.
curious about something because um, we often at Nina Collective get asked to help organizations engage with and in community, to listen to community, to help inform these larger strategic plans or these, which is important. It's important to listen, just as you listen to seventh graders and just as
Mhm.
you listen to your colleagues. It's important to do listening. But
Mhm.
what does it mean to listen in a way? And this is something that we're wrestling with and trying to share. What does it mean to
Mhm.
listen in a way that helps like rebuild trust and helps build for the future rather than just gathering information as transactional or as a performance activity?
Absolutely. In the 21st century, listening has become voyeuristic, right? People go, they hear other people's stories, right? And then they go back to the safety of their homes and they live like they always been living, right? And I think about I borrow a lot from history. I am a New Yorker, and I think a lot about the proliferation of jazz in New York City. And jazz, as when we think about kind of the history of these not yet to be United States, jazz is the only American thing ever, right? Like there is nothing American except for jazz. And so when you look at the proliferation of jazz in New York City, jazz was uptown, jazz was in Harlem, right? And you would get downtown people, middle class folks, white folks who would go uptown among brown folks and poor folks to listen to jazz, using that verb to listen to jazz. And they would return to their homes downtown and they would continue living their lives and nothing would change. So they would listen to these stories, they would listen to the blues, they would listen to the heartache, and then they would go back downtown to their apartments and nothing changed. Right. And then the same thing happens with hip hop, right? Where people come up to the Bronx, they hear our stories, and then they return to the safety of their homes, their bedrooms, their headphones, and nothing changes. And so I've been really paying attention to the art historians, like how do we find change? And the way the change happened was people would go listen to the jazz, people would go listen to the hip hop, and then they would stay and contribute, right? And that's where we found small windows of change when people, before they would go home, they would pause. And so I asked myself, what does that look like in a community organization? What does that look like in a school? And so listening then, because when we think about two dimensional listening only has one point. That's the site of the message being communicated, and then it's over. But I think then what can three-dimensional listening look like, borrowing from jazz and hip hop? Three-dimensional listening means there's the first point, the site of the message being communicated. But then there's the second point. I have to pause and process. And the third point, I have to do something, right? And so when I think about listening as a three-step process. There is a message that someone in a community, someone in an organization, someone in a classroom is communicating to me. Once I've received that message, I pause, process, affirm, and then I commit to doing something. And the doing something can be something small or it can be something huge. But I think what ends up happening is when we receive messages and don't do something, that turns it into a transaction, right? But when I receive a message and I think about, okay, let me process, let me think, let me sit in community with other people. Now let's think about what we want to do. Um, and, just something I remember just like last week, I was in a classroom and, well, this was 2 weeks ago. I was building radios with kids. So I'm sitting in this classroom, and it's mostly boys, and we all have tools, and I'm teaching them how to build a really simple transistor radio. And one of the kids got done with the radio first. And so everybody was cheering for him. He turned the radio on, it worked, he was able to receive a station. But then some of the kids were really overwhelmed that they could not complete their radio. And what was really powerful was he would go to the desk of a colleague or a peer who could not finish the radio, and he like listened to them. Um, and they would be like, "Oh, I can't get the antenna to work, or I can't get this transistor to connect to the motherboard," and he would listen, and I watched this kid, like, instead of, like, doing it for his friends, he kind of offered a little bit of advice. He was like, "Well, try it this way or try it this other way." And so I watched that three-part listening. Okay, this message is being communicated that my friend in class is in trouble or that my friend in class is frustrated. Let me process and let me think about what I'm gonna do. So the simple act of offering advice was a thing that he could do, right? And so watching a 12-year-old do what institutions for generations have failed to do in his community, was really powerful, to think about. Wow, and this is something that we can all contribute, right? We all might not be presidents of organizations or principals of schools, but I can find a friend who's having a hard time and listen. I can have a friend who's having a joyful time and listen and think about what I might do to spread that joy, right? And so I think when we think about our organizations and listening and how we move into communal space, I think we can be really strategic about how we teach listening. And so I talked to kids. I was like, okay, everybody just saw Christian do that. And I want to name what Christian just did. So when I'm in classroom space, I'll say, all right, kids, we just saw Christian finish his project, go to another person, hear what they had to say. But I want you to watch Christian's body. Christian stood still for a moment before he decided what he was going to do next, right? And so I'm clarifying what listening looks like for kids so that because humans often do this organically, right? And part of good teaching is noticing what humans do organically and naming it out loud, right? So that folks can go replicate those behaviors. And so I think in community space, we can name what listening is and what we expect in listening. So we can say, "Hey, welcome to my organization. You've now partnered with us, and in our family, we communicate and listen like this." Why in our family, listening isn't just a one-dimensional thing. In our family, every time we tell stories to each other, we pause and make decisions about what we're going to do next. And so building real time organizational protocols for how we want to move and be together is really important.
So beautiful.
I feel already that my nervous system is being regulated like real time by
Mm,
all the beautiful gifts that you
mhm.
have shared with us.
Yeah.
And what I have noticed is that you have always bring this invitation for us to notice what's happening in a room, and then even like listening and perhaps being with young people for so long
Mm.
build us, right? Like as a fellow educator and someone that
Yeah.
had with young person, in middle schools, we something in our bodies change so we can actually notice the world around us more attentively. And not just what's being said, but also what's not being said,
Mm,
and how we're behaving and how our bodies are moving in that space. What else would you say we should pay attention to, specifically when we are moving towards the space of repairing and
mm,
restoration of harm,
mhm.
and really intentionally restoring connections?
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
beyond that, Cornelius, like really centering joy, right? How
Mhm.
that can be that practice, not just focusing on the harm, but just moving us to center joy.
Yeah, I think we can talk about it. Like, there are so many things that we don't talk about that we just expect that other people know. And one practice that I have developed at the end of every class that I teach, and you could apply this to organizations, literally 6 times a day. There are 6 periods in a school day. For the last 3 minutes, I ask the kids, what is one thing that I did today that really supported you as a learner? And what is one thing that I did today that did not work for you as a learner? And then I give kids time to just pause and think about that. And then they raise their hands and they tell me, hey, when you did this today, that really supported me as a learner. And then what I would say back to them is, okay, that's something then that I will replicate tomorrow. Or when they raise their hand and say, well, this thing that you did earlier, that really did not work with me, or I felt a lot of anxiety when that happened. And then I'm like, okay, so I'll think about this tomorrow and I'll make sure to avoid that behavior tomorrow. But just the simple act of rendering these things were already happening in the classroom, but they were invisible. And so pausing to render those things visible is really important for organizational and communal health. Um, Also, paying attention to rituals and specifically when people break ritual is really important. So, even on this Zoom right now, as I'm looking at all of you, one of the things I noticed that when Alia is learning, she gestures, right? And so, if she were my student, I would know that about her. That Alia, when she's really learning, she makes a gesture. So, I would be very vigilant anytime I'm teaching to make sure that I'm checking in with Aaliyah. And so I might come to school one day and I'm like, oh, I noticed that Aaliyah is not making gestures. Something is wrong. She broke ritual, right? And so paying attention to when rituals break is a really important moment in the health of any organization or classroom. And so to be attentive to that as the facilitator or leader, that's not anything that Aaliyah will ever say. You know, if Aaliyah were 12, she would not say, today is a rough day for me, but I would have to pay attention. Oh, she's not making gestures today. I need to check in with her. I need to spend some time with her. And so, really, the work of repair, I've always believed, is in the small interpersonal details. Um, and so, really paying attention to those things and rendering those things visible to say, hey, Aaliyah, I respect you as a learner so much that I know what your learning looks like. And today I don't see that. How can I check in with you? How can I support you? Yeah.
Mm. Yes, I was gonna say, and in the Zoom format, Alia
Yeah.
also types in the chat. She's the most active chatter on Zoom. So thank
Uh,
you for bringing that.
Thanks for being here with us on Another Way is Possible. If something sparked in you today, an idea, a memory, a question, hold on to it, share it, let it ripple. This work is ongoing and it's work we do better together. To learn more, join our community of practice, explore the full 5-year brief, or connect with us at ninacollective.com. And if today's episode moved you, consider sharing with someone who needs a reminder that change is not only possible, it's already happening. Until next time, stay rooted, stay connected, and keep imagining another way is possible.